Welcome again. We're, as always, happy to have you here. My name is Vivian Conger, and I'm a member of the Humanities Curriculum Committee. And it's our team that's bringing you this course. And so we're very happy to do that and to have you here at this session. So as usual, please take out your cell phones, silence them, mute them, turn them off, just as long as they don't ring during the session. Usually I forget to do that myself, and I've done that already. So also welcome to the crowd joining us via Zoom in the HASP virtual classroom. Our special thanks to our course technician today, Amy Weber, for supporting a third time saying this, supporting our hybrid modality. That just seems so weird to me, but one more time, I think I'll have to say that, and it might be all right. So if you have any questions or comments to pose at the appropriate times, we will please ask you to wait till I can get to you with the microphone. You might be able to hear everyone, but I think they can't hear so well on the Zoom, and some of us don't hear as well as others. So I get around pretty good. Let's see. Ian always has some announcements for me to make. So please note our February monthly meeting will be hosted next Tuesday, February 13th at 9:30 a.m. at the Jack H. Miller Center for Musical Arts, where we always are. You may join us from home via the live stream, so stay tuned to the HASP happenings for the link to join. The program for next Tuesday is titled Holland BPW Clean Energy, Cleaner Community, and it's presented by Dave Koster, the General Manager of the Holland Board of Public Works. As always, you are invited to join us in the lobby of the Jack Miller Center at 9 a.m. for coffee and cookies and conversation. And the cookies are wonderful, so I always try to get there early enough for that at least. And so once again, we are welcoming Jim Bratt. I almost forgot your name after all this time. This is our third session of Tocqueville's Democracy in America, session 3, Religion and Family. You all have heard this. I'll go over it probably fewer and fewer words each time, but Jim got his BA from Calvin, his PhD from Yale. He taught religious studies at the University of Pittsburgh, and he taught history at Calvin, 1987 until he retired in 2016. His main publishing interests are Dutch Calvinism and Abraham Kuyper, and it grew from his Dutch Reform background. His principal teaching interests have been in early America and American religious and intellectual history. So without further ado, please join us in welcoming again, Jim Bratt. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really enjoy being here, and I've heard from a number of you that you're enjoying it, so that's good. I'm glad we have the shades drawn against this strange weather. Tina and I, the day after last session, so next Tuesday, we're flying off to Southern California to visit my sister and brother-in-law. And right now it looks like we're leaving the good weather for the bad. So I hope things revert to normal. Yeah, the session today, I think, maybe connects best of all the sessions, or I don't know best, but it certainly connects directly to the current state of America. because I mean, the big picture here, in the 1960s, the United States underwent a cultural revolution, we can see now. Had to do with a lot with arrangements and attitudes toward race and arrangements and attitudes toward gender. And we're still living in the backwash or the aftermath. The waters are still in turmoil over that. And today, Tocqueville talks about religion and the family in a way that sounds very much like the family values people. So my students at Calvin, when I taught this last month, were really ready to jump on that. Well, they didn't like it a bit. But we want to suspend, well, we want to enact some historical imagination here, transport back in time. Tocqueville is talking about, at least in terms of family, what we might regard as a progressive change, right? This separate spheres thing, girls being American girls being the freest in the world and American wives being the most subordinate in the world, or the most constrained in the world. He says that was a good thing compared to what aristocracy spelled out, compared to the turbulence in France, to which his own personal life contributed. I mean, it's really weird to read him talking about, strict straight-laced women, when in France he's hitting on everyone that he can see. But anyway, well, he tried, but he struck out apparently. He was, I told my students he batted 0 for America. And he was, I mean, he's a suave, attractive Frenchman. Oh, how come I can't get anywhere? Well, these women, they're so strong and straight-laced. So yeah, let's, as we consider this, try to figure out how these changes in the family were occurring right under his view. So he didn't know how this was going to work out, but he saw the rise of an order that we now regard as old-fashioned and old school. So how it impressed him, and what function it had in America, how it stabilized the American Republic. So it was the bulwark, one of the chief bulwarks of what he saw as the wave of the future, a democratic society. So those are some of the consideration we'll have in mind. Now, I had a couple slides left over from last time we talking about the American character. I think if we have time at the end of the session, we'll revert to those. Otherwise, we'll maybe conclude on that next week, the paradoxical character of Americans. So ambitious, so restless, the freest people in the world, walking around under a cloud of anxiety, American character. Let's maybe do that at the end of today or the end of next time. So Tocqueville is not a hierarchical writer, right? He doesn't start from a strict outline and take care of a topic and then go on to the next one. He loops around. We've noted this before. And so what I'm trying to do today is kind of condense or bring together what he says in different spots in the reading for today and different spots in the book, and try to make some order of it. So please do ask questions if I'm going to be leaving a bunch of stuff out. Did you know that Roman Catholics were the most democratic people in the world? Oh, say what? It's interesting, his argument there. And some other themes. So bring those up and bring in some observations you have out of this very, very rich material. So I'm going to be kind of just post-holing here and there to pick out some of the major points. So the paradoxical function of religion in America. And remember, he's writing for, first of all, a French audience where you have, we're coming out of absolute monarchy, and we still have an established church, the Roman Catholic Church, that is a monopoly on public education. And the apologists for the system say you have to have a strong religion, an established religion upholding the state, or everything will fall apart. And Tocqueville's arguing here that if you disestablish the religion, it'll be more powerful than ever. And it'll be good for the religion and it'll be good for the government. So that he's making an argument against the prevailing wisdom in his social class back in France. So first of all, religion must be considered as the first of America's political institutions. What's the most important political institution in America? Not the Constitution, religion. Really? And it's because it's so important because we have what we call separation of church and state. He didn't use that term. That didn't come into normal conventional discourse really until World War II era with the Supreme Court decision. Separation of church and state. Religion must be considered the first of America's political institution because it never intervenes directly in government. So how do we resolve that paradox? Because religion happens at the level of culture. Remember those 4 layers that I put on the board the other day, last time? There's politics, the system of laws, there's society, the system of personal relations, there's culture, the system of norms and values and ideas, and there's economics, the system of production and consumption. Religion belongs in the level of culture and society, and from there it washes over. It bears its indirect, very often invisible influence on politics. Religion frames the assumptions about behavior and permeates the assumptions about politics. That's how it can be the most powerful or the most important or the first of all American political institutions without being in any way established. It permeates the culture. It regulates manners, mores. I had to explain to my students that mores, it's not pronounced mores, it's mores, which is a very tough word to translate into English. What does it mean in English? It means manners, it means morals, it means habits, habitual practices, and so forth. Mores dictate the things that are just not to be done. Okay. So religion regulates manners or mores. He says in another place, it rules the mind. It fetters the imagination. This is one of his complaints about America, that they're so conformist and gravitate toward the mean, toward the average. He says, yeah, America lacks a desire for greatness and it lacks imagination. Well, religion does that, and it's a good thing. Here, in this context, it's a good thing. It's my words, it's the religion forms the background consensus of values and norms. And it's out of that widely shared consensus that religion can have such powerful effect without having any kind of establishment. And as for today, one of the things that the 1960s did was break up that consensus. So we have whatever we agree to consensually in America today is not what Tocqueville's talking about. And maybe we don't have a general consensus in the background, in the subterranean level, and that's what's helped causing so much of our political distress. Anyway, the background consensus of values and norms. What is this? Well, I'm going to unpack that in a minute, but I would describe it as the Protestant ethic as sort of a Unitarian theology. Okay, we're not, it's an anti-dogmatic religion, he says, but it's dogmatic only about one thing, ethics, morality. Okay, so further on the paradoxical function or the paradoxes of religion in America, sincerity in belief is optional. a consensus like this invites hypocrisy. And he says at another point, I don't know if it's in the reading for today, I forget. So political rulers, political authorities in America must either believe this or certainly pretend to believe it. Okay, so you have to salute religion even if you don't know anything about it. See Donald Trump in 2 Corinthians. See Howard Dean, I don't know, the Iowa primaries. So he was kind of a rabble-rouser, a Democrat going for the president nomination. I don't remember the exact year, but yeah, he was, I think, no, was he Jewish and couldn't name one of the books of Torah? But yeah, so we have, I mean, functional agnostics, but you have to salute, you have to say nice, warm, cooey things about religion, or you're not going to get started in American politics. Hypocrisy must be common, says Tocqueville. Nonetheless, Christianity means more actual power over souls in America than anywhere else. This is from page 336 in the Library of America volume. It's on the bottom of page 3 in the handout. So why does everybody have to salute religion, even if they don't have any of it in their heart, much less in their weekly practice? Because Tocqueville says religion is essential to liberty. And here we're playing on a distinction often pointed out to me in my 60s youth, right? To us rabble rousers, liberty is not the same as license. That's my mother's voice. Okay. Liberty is not the same as license. Liberty is not the same as licentiousness. The law, Tocqueville says of Americans, the law allows them to do anything and everything, but some things religion keeps them from imagining or attempting. Okay, so there's this internal moral hedge or corral around territory on which you may really exercise liberty. And everything outside of that becomes licentiousness. Because if there's no offense and everything is allowed, you would have anarchy, you would have chaos, and those are the 2 prime ingredients that go into the imposition of despotism. So you have to constrain yourself from some possible behaviors, or you're inviting in a really strong prohibitionary regime, be it religious or political, whatever. Religion is the key to self-restraint. Therefore, he says in another spot, the top of 340 or the middle of page 6 on the handout, despotism might not need religion. Monarchy might not need religion. Hey, French audience, monarchy doesn't need religion because the political authority is so strong. The laws forbid so many things. But in a democracy where the laws don't forbid much, you absolutely have to have religion. A democratic republic absolutely does need religion. And here's one of the haunting quotes in this book. How can a society fail to perish if, as political bonds are loosened, moral bonds are not tightened? What is to be done with a people that is its own master if it is not obedient to God? And here he's remembering the harshest days of the French Revolution. The French Revolution at one point had a slogan, no God or master. No God or master. And then people who really suspected the French Revolution, like Tocqueville, like Abraham Kuyper, and many others in America at the time. Even Thomas Jefferson had his doubts about this, about what was going on in France. If you have neither God nor master, you will descend into anarchy and chaos, and then you will get a worse master than before. Excuse me. See the trek from the monarch across the different phases of the French Revolution, and you end up with a worse monarch than before, Napoleon. So if you don't want that, you got to have some self-restraint. You have to have some collective self-restraint. You can't have individuals making up their mind one by one to restrain themselves. You have to have a common ethos. So despotism in a monarchy can do without religion, but a democratic republic absolutely cannot. What is to be done with a people that is its own master if it is not obedient to God? So those are the functions of religion in America. That's why religion is a necessity. But what kind of religion is this? When I heard Tocqueville talked about when I was in college and growing up, people would be arguing that's really important that the American public observe Christianity, even if Christianity cannot be established, or flex a little bit, the Judeo-Christian tradition, right? That phrase, as near as I can tell, was invented in the Franklin Roosevelt administration as an anti-Holocaust measure, trying to be generous. The biblical tradition, I say, Judeo-Christian tradition, that's now become something of a conservative mantra. But what is how many times in his writing about religion, how many times does Tocqueville mention Jesus? 0. Question, can you have Christianity without Jesus? Well, he says, I'm talking from a human point of view. I'm talking about his political effectiveness. And then Jesus bollocks up the works, right? Because you have some Jesus worshipers, and you have some other people that said, what's on the name of Jesus has been pretty horrible, the Jews, and others, Muslims, Jesus is a good guy, but he's the prophet just before the real prophet. So you can't introduce concrete content from religion, or you said indivisiveness, right? But is he talking about Christianity or religion? He mentions Christianity a number of times, but much more often he says religion. So what is this religion? First of all, it's monotheistic. The idea of the unity of the human race, he says, and this is on page 505 in the middle of a handout, page 14. The idea of the unity of the human race leads to the idea of the unity of the Creator. Notice his order of logic here. Because we have a sense from nature, from experience, from reason, that the human race is one united body, therefore we project the idea of the unity of the Creator. That's a monotheistic. In classic Christian political philosophy, the direction is the opposite, right? Because we have God, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. From that, we derive, in the beginning, God created people in his own image. So we start with God and we end up with the human race. Tocqueville moves in the opposite direction here, a very interesting move. Secondly, religion in America, and he reverts to this again and again. He just can't believe it. He's so amazed. It's so this worldly. I tried to talk to the clergy about heaven and salvation, and they talk about liberty and prosperity. I can't, I talk to these clergy, and I don't know if I'm talking to clergymen or businessmen. Huh? Yeah, you were clergy as well? Yeah. What the church needs today is a good business model, right? It's free enterprise, but also organization and management. Our daughter-in-law is the head of a pretty big church outside of Milwaukee, and she said, "Dad, I got an MDiv, but I really need an MBA." Most of her week is spent in being a CEO of a big structure. Well, it's not just that, but Tocqueville talks about how this worldly, the clergy's vision and promotion of the value of their religion is. I think Tocqueville is used to Roman Catholicism in France, which is very ritual heavy, and constantly talking about sacrificing in this world to gain heavenly rest. So you're gaining heavenly salvation, an escalator up to the good place when time runs out, when your life runs out. So he's expecting that. And he sees in America, it's not an escalator up there, it's a highway all around you where religious energy goes. Very interesting. Religion, therefore, is not making otherworldly demands. And you get a sense from Tocqueville that it's not making really extreme demands either, because he said, what kind of religion is going to prosper here? Well, it has to accommodate the drive for material well-being. Remember, that's the great engine of American life from last time. You can't be anti-materialistic. You want to say, go for prosperity, but try to keep it under control, right? Covet just a little bit. So if you set out yourself up against the drive for material well-being, you're going to fail here. And you have to conform. You have to conform to public opinion. And when I read this, I recalled, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. George, I remember your comment last time that all American, from the point of view of the clergy, it's materialist, pragmatist, and individualist. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you can't really buck that trend. You gotta try to pitch your wares in that shop. And it's interesting, historians today, when they look back at American religion this time, what they generally most value is the dissenting quality of American religion. They like the abolitionists, who were, at least most of them originally anyway, very religious, even evangelical and also Quaker in their drive. It's the dissenting quality of religion that we honor, say, in Martin Luther King Jr. It's religion that pushes back that we like, or we tend to honor, if in retrospect, if not in our own time. But he's not seeing that. Tocqueville tends to ask how do things work? How do they mesh together? We'll see in a minute, the echo of Karl Marx, we look at how they fall apart. What are their internal stresses? So he's a consensus, coordinating, collaboration kind of guy. So you have to conform to public opinion. He also says in a republic, and here he's looking at all this Protestantism around him, it works best when it's very minimalist in doctrine and ritual. And again, I think he's responding to the France of his own time, where the universities and the theologians were going hammers and tongs at each other, and there was a great deal of ritual elaboration. In America, we try to keep that to a minimum. So religion, bottom line, is theologically easy, but behaviorally strict. Here's another one of those money quotes. There's no end to the proliferation of sects, we would say denominations in America, but never mind. Each person worships God in its own way. Each sect worships God in its own way, but all preach the same morality in God's name. So you don't have to question which sect, which denomination is theologically correct. God may care about that, but we don't have to. We just have to get everybody to observe the rules. In America, that goes like gangbusters. So pragmatic, materialistic, individualistic, and conformist. Yeah, would you? That'll work. Yeah. Well, that's what Tocqueville says. You create a consensus of morality, and he says that's vital to the survival of the American Republic. So he says in the middle section here of today's reading, page 501 to 509, here he's anticipating modern sociologists, or the great founding fathers and mothers of the sociological discipline. Emil Durkheim, especially, but also Max Weber, French and German, respectively. Emil Durkheim was especially strong on this point, emphatic on this point, that every society, if it's going to cohere, has to have some kind of common set of overarching ideas and values. Going back to that comment from Rousseau that I think I cited last time or the time before, I cannot be neighbors with a man. I cannot live as a neighbor with a man whom I think is going to hell. Unless we share a common base of values and allegiances, I can't trust him. I can't be a neighbor. So you have to have, and Tocqueville is talking in that strain, and he's anticipating this one school of modern sociology from Durkheim, that the great sociologist of religion from this past generation, Peter Berger, said there has to be a sacred canopy. Title of one of his book, there has to be a sacred canopy over society, or things fall apart. Face it, Tocqueville says, we none of us, especially in America, where they're so frenzied going after the main chance, you don't have time to think about your ultimate values and your ultimate ideas. And also you don't have the capacity for it. To solve the problem of God and the problem of evil, the best thinkers in the Western world have gone after that. They couldn't do it. And Joe Schmo is going to pull it off. No, we can't work through that. We have to take that on faith, be it a supernatural faith or a secular faith. We have to take, we inherit and we have to live by a common set of values that we haven't thought through. So going back to the set of questions he brought over from his family's experience in the French Revolution, one of them was, can people achieve equality? If they achieve it, can they sustain it? If they sustain it, do they want it? We've been looking at that last week and before. But here's the other question. Can a society function without some set of transcendent values? Tocqueville says no. Can that set of transcendent values cohere, be forceful, be effective, if it doesn't have an institution enforcing it, like the Roman Catholic Church? And Tocqueville here says, yes, you don't need an institution to force this down your throat. In fact, it works better if it doesn't. It works better if it's in the background and you're just assumed. So there has to be a moral consensus, an intellectual consensus. And when you look back at what Tocqueville has in mind here, it brings up the conclusion of a recent book. I was going to write down the reference. Oh yeah, Christian Smith, premier sociologist of religion, in the year 2005. He teaches sociology. He used to teach, I think, at Duke, and now he's at Notre Dame. 2005 text, Soul Searching, the Religious and Spiritual Lives of American Teenagers. You guys, maybe you're familiar with that. So it was a massive, wide-ranging survey of opinion among American high schoolers. And you get to the religion question. What is religion important to you? Yeah, I'm religious. Well, no, I'm spiritual anyway. Maybe not religious, but I'm spiritual. Well, what does this come to you for you? Well, there is a God, and he wants you to do the right thing, and he wants you to be happy. You know, what does the Lord thy God require of thee? To be happy and good. Update on Micah 6, verse 8, right? Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly. No, the American God, the American teenager's God anyway, wants you to be nice and happy and good. Moralistic therapeutic deism. And that's the phrase. So when I was working through Tocqueville, what does this religion come to? Well, every sect has their own, worships God in their own way, but they all preach the same morality. There's your moralism. Therapeutic, don't buck the consensus. Just material well-being, that's okay. So you should be happy. At least you should be pursuing happiness. in a frenzy. And it has to be monotheistic. The idea of the unity of human race gives us the idea of the unity of the creator. So I was really struck. In fact, the first time I tumbled to this idea, I was laughing in my chair that Tocqueville in 1835 discovered in America among adults what Christian Smith discovered in American teenagers 170 years later. So this might be the everlasting consensus of American religion. Our foremost political institution, not Christianity, because that gets divisive, not any specific religion, but this moralistic, therapeutic, maybe theism, if theism rubs you the wrong way. There's a God up there who wants us to be happy and good. Now let's do it. Okay. Okay. Let's take a break here for questions. The next set is the stuff is going to be that this is women's work, right? The hard rock of American religion is woman. Oh, let me just leave. And their role. So first, how religion functions politically and why it's so important. Yeah.
Seems like the last bit of mores has disappeared in the last 8 years, like another cultural revolution where truth doesn't matter anymore and it's whatever might work. You say whatever might work. You can do anything. You can say anything.
Yeah.
It's very frightening.
Yeah, and I think that has to do, going back to our first session, with the fragmentation of communication. If you're putting your claims out there, but only people who agree with you are looking at them, then yeah, you can say, so a broad range of communication, a broad community compels you to be honest to, or to honor the views of other people, and then try to come to some agreed upon. I mean, you're not going to agree on everything, but there's some rock hard things you have to agree on. And so with the, I'm not sure of this, I don't do any of the research on it, but there are some pretty prominent voices that say that it's social media that's really done the fragmentation here. We're all in echo chambers, silos. Yeah.
So many of the early Americans were deist or Unitarian Universalists. Where do they fit into this whole picture? Because they really don't define themselves as Christians.
Right. So Universalist Unitarians, back in Tocqueville's time, the Unitarians very much did identify themselves as Christians. That's why Emerson's Divinity School address, you mentioned the first week, was so inflammatory because it said Jesus schmeezus. Universalists back at that time would also say that they were Christian. They just disagreed violently with the idea that the Christian God was punitive and was sending people to hell. So at that time, they were still, they would still honor or identify themselves as part of the Christian thing. And I think that has really, that'd be good. I think that really has changed since World War II, that it's started changing after the Civil War, but it's gotten more and more elastic. So.
I was a Unitarian in Evanston for 17 years, and we definitely didn't define ourselves as Christians.
Right, right. Yeah, when I taught at Pitt, there were some adult learners in the class. I always love to have people bringing in real experience. And I started my history of American religion with the Puritans. I said, oh yeah, we're Plymouth people, we're Plymouth colony people, descendants. And they said, oh, we're having a special Thanksgiving Day service or Sunday observing Thanksgiving. Would you like to come and speak? Oh, sure. I do adult eds all the time. So, okay. Okay, so we go into this converted dairy barn. Beautiful, beautiful. worship sanctuary. And they did this and that, and they started out, they sang a hymn by John Greenleaf Whittier, and then this and that. And it was about time for the sermon, and said, now here's Professor Bratt. I thought I was given a lecture. I was given the sermon. But yeah, so it was definitely post-Christian. Yeah.
I'm reflecting in my mind your addition to my unholy trinity, the conformist, and note up there the consensus around moralistic therapeutic deism. And we just comment that's a powerful check on the tendency of any pastor to be prophetic.
Yeah.
And I suspect that was the case in 1830 as well.
Yeah, well, 1831, when he's visiting, William Lloyd Garrison is founding the Liberator, which is the pioneer white abolitionist paper. I think it was 1833, he gets a letter around the streets of Boston with a noose around his neck. When one of his acolytes, Angelina Grimke, later Angelina Grimke Weld, gives a fire-breathing speech in Philadelphia, the mob breaks all the windows and burns the hall down. So yeah, there, and Joseph Smith, who had led his own kind of dissenting organization, gets lynched. Yeah, but it's interesting, it's not from the religion he professed, but the tipping point was, or the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back, was when he destroyed his opponent's printing press. You screw around with freedom of speech,
Yeah.
freedom of the press, you're done. But yeah, it's, yeah, we just had this in church yesterday. The prophet is not, Jesus saying the prophet is not honored in his own country.
That's a long tradition.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, this is women's work. And here's, so Tocqueville on the family. Here's maybe the premier cultural leading family of, well, of 10, 20 years after Tocqueville leaves. This is the Beecher family. The old man in the middle, sitting is Lyman Beecher, who's really the captain of this whole crusade of evangelical, moral, and spiritual reform. He's the founder of the American Temperance Society. He has an incendiary pamphlet denouncing the Aaron Burr, Alexander Hamilton duel. He leads a revival. He's kind of organizing this great engine to carry out revival to the ends of the country, and to therefore make it moral and prosperous and stable, and not incidentally Protestant. He is phobic about the spread of the conspiracy out of Rome to spread Roman Catholicism in the Mississippi and Ohio River valleys. St. Louis, Cincinnati, and Milwaukee, they have a lot of Catholics and they have a lot of beer. Could it be Satan? Anyway, Lyman Beecher, very progressive in many ways, but just zealously Protestant and provincially Protestant that way. Seated on our lower right is the most popular novelist of the 19th century, Harriet Beecher Stowe, his daughter. Uncle Tom's Cabin is the best-selling novel of the whole century. Over her left shoulder, our upper right, is the most popular preacher in the Civil War era. That's Henry Ward Beecher at Pilgrim Church in Brooklyn. You can still go there and see it. And then to Lyman Beecher's right is the most, perhaps the most influential middle of the road women's duties author. That's Catherine Beecher. A treatise on domestic economy, is that the thing? So there are a lot of women who disagreed with her, at least more radical than she, but She's the person, though, it's very ironic, unmarried herself, childless herself, sees marriage with a lot of kids as the bedrock, the cornerstone of the American society. um, yeah, 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 yeah. And yeah, Catherine was a best-selling author. She made her livelihood of this. So, and then interestingly, to Catherine's right, our lower left is Isabella Beecher, who really kicks against the traces. She becomes a spiritualist, right? The rappers, and you discipline yourself to rise in this life to ever more elevated spiritual and moral plane, and you'll continue that and climax that in heaven. Interestingly, Harriet and Isabella lived in the same Hartford neighborhood as did Samuel and Livy Clemens, aka Mark Twain. So it's really worth going to. Have you ever gone to Nook Farm outside of in Hartford? Yeah, that's the Mark Twain house in Hartford. It's a gingerbread Victorian spectacular. It's just nuts. But there was a kind of a literary commune around there with Harriet and Isabella among its members. A lot of former post-Civil War former abolitionists lived there as well. So the family. We've already established that Tocqueville believes that political liberty cannot sustain itself without restrictions, constraints, to keep it from licentiousness. You have to have restraints or it'll all run downhill into anarchy, and then you'll have go over to despotism. So religious constraints on what? And here's another, this might be my favorite money quote. Here we're giving up on the seventh commandment to give free rein, because we give free rein to the 10th, right? In the traditional reformed ordering of the 10 commandments. Fortune tempts man in so many ways in America that religion is often powerless to restrain him. Well, I thought religion had such a strong restraint on people. Well, yeah, it does. But listen, Jim, although religion cannot moderate his ardor for riches, it nonetheless reigns supreme over the soul of woman, and it is woman who shapes mores, that is, say, manners and morality. So here we have a gendered division of labor and a gendered division of virtue, a gendered division of responsibility to uphold moral order. Men, as my good friend says, when she assumes that she's going to make it past St. Peter's gates, she's going to go up to the Lord God Yahweh and say, why did you make male sexual drive peak at age 18? I mean, what's up with that? What's up with these dudes? Says Donna, what's up with these dudes? What indeed? Tocqueville says, yeah, they're hopeless. You know, they just can't stop themselves from this drive, this restless compulsion to travel, to acquire, this anxiety that they're missing out and they have to try something new. The drive for acquisition is unstoppable in the American male. But what keeps it all from running into the ground is that sexuality is supremely restrained, and that's the job of women. And in America, they do it darn well. Okay? Morality here, mores, means control of sex. And in the paragraph right after this one, where he's talking about that, yeah, on page 336, or top of page 4 in the handout. So right after this quotation on the board here, of all the countries in the world, America is surely the one in which the marriage bond is most respected and in which people subscribe to the loftiest and most just ideal of conjugal happiness. Then he goes on into this amazing paragraph. In Europe, virtually all social disorders are born at home, close to the hearth and not far from the marriage bed. Why is French politics so chaotic? Because, yeah, sorry, because you know, guys are hitting on each other's wives. That creates distrust, and what happens, or what they fear, the cuckold fears is happening at his home, gets carried over into the halls of Parliament, and then it all goes to hell. Yeah. So that's, I thought, you know, that was a new one to me, Alexis, but so it's the ordered home. It is this constrained and restrained home that creates a viable order in the business world and the commercial world, especially in the political world. Stability in the home is the source of stability in politics and society. And here we go to a really brief segue here, a tangent here into some traditional, old political theory, going back to Aristotle. The terms will be different from one to another. But long ago, political thinkers started saying there are different types of government, right? But they each need a kind of a different control structure. They need a different set of assumptions. They need a different mood in society to uphold them or to operate efficiently. They need a different ethos. And each of them can be perverted. So rule by one, monarchy, its perversion is tyranny. And the ethos needed to sustain it, to make it work well, is fear or awe. So that term from the Hebrew scriptures, you shall fear the Lord your God. That doesn't mean be afraid of him, but you should render him deep respect. You don't question. You view the ruler, supernatural ruler, earthly ruler, with awe. That's what you need for a monarchy, because the monarch cannot enforce everybody to obey from his throne all the time. You just don't have enough cops. You have to engender fear and awe in the populace. Aristocracy is ruled by the few. Its perversion is oligarchy. And what you need there, and Tocqueville has talked about this in this book, is an ethos or a respect for glory and honor. So aristocrats are always trying to have the best art and to do themselves up in the fanciest silks and satins, with beauty spots on their cheek, right? And a really good wig. They prance around showing their wealth and their good taste and collecting the best art and collecting the best women and collecting the best horses, because this reverberates from their founding gesture of military glory. So glory and honor is the necessary ethos for aristocracy. Democracy, the rule by the many, sometimes called also the republic, its perversion is mob rule, sometimes called democracy, depending on your author. But the rule by the many, call it whatever you will, the ethos there is virtue. And we talked about this last time. I mentioned it right at the end. The founding fathers are all about this. You'll read often right-wing writers today invoking James Madison, saying that a republic cannot exist unless it is religious. He himself was a deist. What he meant was you cannot have a republic unless you have a sense of virtue seeping all the way down in the populace. But what does virtue mean for the founding fathers? It wasn't, first of all, about sex. It was about money, self-restraint in economic acquisition. Machiavelli, the good Machiavelli, not the Prince Machiavelli, but the good Machiavelli, talked about this as well. How did Rome fall? How did his own Florence fall and exile him to live out on a farm? Because factions emerged in the populace between the rival big families, because they all wanted more power, and they all wanted more power so they could get more material goods. The unrestrained lust of material acquisition is the death of the republic. So we need virtue to be observed. You need the leading men and copying them, people lower down, to show themselves to be people of self-control. That's why Beecher was so opposed to dueling. You're out of control. You can't let your rivalry be adjudicated in court where it belongs. You're taking it out personally. You have to be people of self-control, or a republic cannot stand. And here we can remember a famous, though it's become controversial, speech by John Winthrop, founder of Massachusetts Bay Colony, the founding governor, a model of Christian charity. That speech ends on the famous thing: we must consider that we are a people on a hill, and the eyes of all the world are upon us. What that bulk of that speech is about is economics. It's about economics. And what Winthrop was doing in his conclusion was saying, there is a test in this course, and we can well flunk it. How do we not become an anathema, a laughingstock before our neighbors? My favorite line out of there: we must conduct ourselves willing to sacrifice our superfluities for our neighbors' necessities. We must be willing and able to forego our luxuries for our neighbor's need. That could be a mantra for this Republican virtue model. Economic self-restraint. So classically, virtue means a citizen's, let's say men's, self-restraint, especially with regard to economic ambition and curtailment of greed. By the time Tocqueville is visiting America, a moral revolution is occurring, whereby virtue is becoming starts to be women's work. What is a woman of virtue? A virgin until she marries, and then a one-man woman until she dies. Right? That is a woman's virtue. And this is, and here's the big question mark, Tocqueville was not visiting the mean streets of New York City or New Orleans. He thought, and among the circles that he was visiting, these Yankees going along the Erie Canal, he saw, at least on the surface, that these strict rules of sexual purity were successfully being enforced by women on men. So this was working. So, how is this achieved? Let me go back here a minute. No, we'll go on to this. The bottom line here is one way it's achieved. We have here, he's at the birth of the so-called separate spheres theory, or what is known in some religious circles today as the theory of complementarianism, right? Men and women are equal, but they are essentially different. Women have certain gifts and capacities. Men have certain gifts and capacities. And things go well when they each do their own thing and stay in their own lane. A really conservative position today. It was the emerging model in middle class, also Unitarian, theologically liberal circles at the time. Because what's happening here is, Tocqueville notes, the end of classic patriarchal society. Now, most historians would say that patriarchy carries on very well at this point and beyond, but there is one change that's being made. Theoretically and in practice, the old man has been dominant over all circles, including family life. And he describes early on how the sons had to fear and quake in front of Papa. Well, now Dad's your friend, right? He's liberating his sons. And my students this past January pointed out how Tocqueville says nothing at this point about liberating daughters. That comes in the next chapter. But the old patriarch who's on his throne, conducting the family business, the family politics, the family this, the family that, also internal affairs, has divided now. The father has become the Secretary of State, the Secretary of External Relations, and mom has become the Secretary of the Interior. Okay. The father, the patriarch, has given functional authority to his wife. And this is a step forward in, the sense of liberation. Now, is that the end of it, or does one step of liberation lead to the next? Thereby hangs the tale. We'll get to that. But we have the end of the traditional patriarchal family. The sons have their freedom. He then goes on to these two amazing chapters. Yeah, I didn't have to prod my students very much to talk about this. The girls were really pissed. The daughters are liberated. I have seen there is no group of girls, of daughters in the world as free as the American daughter, says Tocqueville. They are allowed to do anything. They can go on the street by themselves. They can go to shops by themselves. You know what happened in Italy if you do this? If a girl appears by herself, she must be a streetwalker, right? Liberate daughters for what? Remember license and liberty? You liberate daughters for self-control. You give them liberty, you teach them the ways of liberty early on so they know not to stray too far. They know how not to indulge themselves. They know how not to misuse this. And why? Because your parents, you can figure out how this worked with if you had daughters. You're trying to make them savvy for the marriage market. Because and here was the point of objection from my students. I said, don't kill the messenger, please. There's one option in polite circles for women at that point, for daughters, and that is to get married. If you're not married, oh, you're a spinster, Now there are people who defy this convention, but they're very controversial. They're prophets. But the dominant middle class ethos in which he's navigating, this is the thing. Girls are being brought up very early on to be just a little bit of a tease, but not go too far. And then when they get married, quote Tocqueville, there is no set of women in the Western world that is more constrained. Makes marriage a real inviting deal, doesn't it? And the dissenting religious communities, as we've already talked about at this time, the Shakers, the United Community, the Mormons, they all changed the rules about marriage. So if you're going to break with this, you're going to have to break at the fundamental level. So I think Tocqueville's onto something. This is a fundamental measure. Well, here's the deal. Why would a girl sacrifice her autonomy? Because she gains moral authority in the home. She does have, so Tocqueville is theorizing here, so he's supposedly observing from his informants, women do have authority, moral authority in the home, telling their guys what to do. And that's why I found this image online. First, have you guys seen this? These little padlocks, where'd you see them? Yeah. First I saw him was on the bridge over the Rhine in Cologne. And this is when you get engaged, this will often be inscribed with your initials. And you padlock this to a public place. The links on the bridge across the Rhine in Cologne. And so it testifies that this is forever. Your heart is locked forever. In Cologne, this was so popular that the authorities had to go around with bolt cutters, chaining these things off because the bridge was going to collapse into the river. The weight, there were thousands of these things on that bridge. So anyway, the lock of love. This is the padlock of love. This is the deal that Tocqueville observes. And my students, especially the female students a couple of weeks ago, just couldn't believe what he says, that they willingly do this. They're happy to do it. It's a measure of supreme self-control. On that decision, that collective decision, hangs the value, the sustainability of the republic. And therefore, when people ask me what is the outstanding virtue or outstanding element in America, I say the quality of its women, because they're so self-sacrificial. Okay, and hereby lies the emergence. Again, this was at the time, relatively progressive or reform angle in middle-class society. It has now become identified with the conservative edge of evangelical Protestantism, separate spheres. Men can do some things, they're made for some things, particularly the rough and tumble of politics and business. So you ladies, you shouldn't go worry your pretty heads, because if you get involved in politics or business, you're going to lose your virtue. And your minds and your physical strength just aren't up for it. Remember when I was in junior high, we had a girls' basketball team and you weren't allowed to patrol the whole floor? Remember that? You're just not up to it. The limits on Olympic events for women until relatively recently, maybe 60, 70 years ago, could a woman finish the 800 meter dash? Isn't that going to be overtaxing her? This is in the middle of the 20th century, okay? So this thing runs, he's not making this up. He's observing what the assumptions are around him. And he's seeing or arguing for the political value or political virtue of this. But as our friend Karl Marx would say in the next generation about economics, we can bring this slant home into this topic. What are the internal contradictions of this system? Contrary to a former president of Calvin College, I am not a Marxist. But I do find this is Hegelian, essentially. This is not Marx. Marx got this from George Friedrich Hegel, great German philosopher, and I take it from him. Any system, it lines up with Calvinism too, about the world of woe we're in, right? Sin and contradiction. Any system, any human system is going to have fault lines, is going to have internal contradictions. And then they'll break down and a new one will be formed that tries to solve these problems until it too breaks down and so forth. Okay, what are the internal contradictions here? Number one, we have mom who's not made for the market, not made for politics, but she's raising sons to be effective moral agents. And they're going to go out into politics and economics. Where are they going to learn this? From amoral dad? So where's one of the students a couple of weeks ago raised a question, and you guys will maybe resonate to this. How then are male pastors supposed to be moral authorities? If you guys, by being male, are prone to be competitive and ruthless and amoral, what gets you to stand up in a pulpit and speak authoritatively to people? Did you encounter this kind of objection in your ministry? Did you get not so much? Yeah, the micro, yeah.
I observed in various settings that unmarried male clergy were always somewhat suspect.
Mm-hmm.
You know, once you were married, then you were okay. 'Cause
Yeah.
you had somebody keeping in line.
Yeah. In traditional CRC mores, when you graduated from seminary, within 2 weeks, you'd be married. And 2 weeks after that, you'd be installed in your first church. I kind of wonder if it was distrust of a male from a predation, on women in the church. You have a woman, a wife, keep. So yeah.
I want to go back to your previous slide
Okay.
where you introduced the concept of complementarianism. I had not heard that term until about a dozen years ago at the General Synod of the RCA. But I gather that Tocqueville saw this notion of separate spheres, complementarianism, as a sign of what, progressivism, perhaps, and yet, as you've already identified, this is very much the domain of the conservative wing of evangelical Christianity today. So, I'm making a convoluted statement, I guess, but nevertheless, I wonder if some ascribe moral authority to male pastors by virtue of a complementarian theology.
They do, but my students wondered, if women are in charge of moral formation, then what gives you as a male the say-so to get up there and be morally authoritative? And one answer here is that by the late 19th century, you have a movement, especially in the United States, of manly Christianity. Because isn't it a coincidence that guys get up in the pulpit and they're wearing skirts? So maybe you are really women underneath, and that's what gives you moral authority. And so there was this, this is when the Boy Scouts are invented, and the rugged He-Man pastor, who can climb mountains and kayak waterfalls and so forth. There was anxiety in male clergy, judging by newspaper, journal articles, periodical articles, and novels and so forth. There was anxiety among male clergy that they were not regarded as real men, and therefore they could not stand up to the J.P. Morgans of the world and talk economics and talk biblical justice to them. You clergy, all you know is about the home front. You're not, and I heard this in my teenagehood, when my pastor then made one of his very rare comments about business and business ethics. The big insurance agent in the congregation, not in the service, but spoke up afterward and said, the pastors don't know anything about business. They should shut up. And we should remember that Jerry Falwell in 1965, on the Sunday of the Great March on Selma, Alabama, said that, quote, "Preachers have no role in politics. They should stick to the pulpit and spiritual things." This is Jerry Falwell, founder of the Moral Majority. So this notion has legs. And so what we see generally, as often happens, a migration of a once progressive, relatively progressive concept across the spectrum to reside on the conservative edge as conditions in society change, especially as women enter the workforce in bold numbers. There are a lot of women in the workforce back in this day, but they were lower class women. They were Irish immigrant women, that, maids in Protestant homes, or running boarding houses, or working in bakeries, or all sorts of low-level work. So this is born in the very much in and for the middle class. But Tocqueville says that democracy is a middle class system. Pardon me? Yeah, I don't have time in this course to get into his concept on race, but got a lot of blowback there too. There's a question over here. Yeah.
Where am I going?
If he were talking to the middle class, he wasn't seeing the middle class, because those women, if you really look at what was happening, they were helping run the business. They were helping run the farm. They were doing all the work with their husband. And he wasn't seeing what they were doing, the work they were doing.
Yeah, this is, I should amend what I said. This is white and urban middle class. So he's in cities. So yes, on the farm, you know, men had charge of the fields, women had charge of the barn. Huh? They did the, you know, those, yeah. And in, well, in my wife's home village back in the Netherlands before they immigrated, Dad worked all night baking the goods in the back, and Mom was out there selling them in the front. So he's talking about, I guess we would say upper middle class, where we have a division of labor and paid work moves outside the home to a distinct office or something. And so the domicile and the workplace start to divide. And that becomes increasingly the model over the next 100 years. And so that's why this model spreads. And it's interesting that, you know, a lot of people, well, some people today want to freeze it right there, even though we have, you know, massive female participation in the paid workforce. So they're really bucking against the tide. Yeah, I want to give some consideration here. There's a flaw in the system that women, mothers, who supposedly have these essential traits, have to train sons for places and activities of very different traits. So how is the morality or the virtue of mother's maternal leadership, how is that going to get over to sons when they become adults and they enter into the hurly-burly of business and politics? Secondly, Tocqueville noticed, even among the groups that he was conversing with, that these marriages were kind of business-like affairs. The system, he says, renders women respectable and cold rather than tender wives and amiable companions. I wish he had given women's notions about men, that they don't listen, and they're kind of too hot too often, whatever, I don't know. But you can see how, by his point of view, marriage is calculated as a business transaction. This is contractual, right? These autonomous girls know full well the terms of the contract and they sign on. So if you enter into a relationship on such a business-like basis, very transactional basis, I guess we would say, how do you expect this to be emotionally rich and supportive? So there's a lot of trouble in the home, and this comes out, you know, it's already out, but I think of Julia Ward Howe, author of the Battle Hymn of the Republic, herself a great reformer leading up to the Civil War, and her husband, Samuel Gridley Howe, a notable reformer who, when they got home, started slapping her around and beating her up. And when she threatened to sue for divorce, he said, that's fine, but I'm going to get the kids. And the law would have upheld that. So there is, you just got to pull the veneer back here a little bit. Why are so many women eager to join the Shakers and observe celibacy? A, because childbirth is lethal. B, because, geez, wouldn't it be nice if that guy let me alone, you know? So there is a lot of unhappiness born in with this kind of contractual sort of bourgeois marriage that he's talking about. And then thirdly, can you keep women's moral authority at home? And here the answer is no. Because women, the next decade, from 1835 to 1845, start saying, you know, if we're the moral authorities in society, then wouldn't it be good to get that home-like moral influence out there? The largest women's organization in the United States by the end of the 19th century is the Women's Christian Temperance Organization, run by and through and for women. This is very much in the public sphere. Even at this time, only men had the right to vote, but so much of the organizing and the pamphlet distribution and the petition drives that were so important in abolitionism are being conducted by women. So if we're so good for the home, is society overbrimming with virtue that we should just stay at home? No, it needs us. So this is a license to fly. They, in assigning moral authority to women, you've kind of given away the store. And that becomes more and more evident. It's no accident that the Women's Rights Convention is held in 1848, right in the heart of the Yankee Trail here along the Erie Canal that Tocqueville is navigating. And some of the explosive dynamics that he's laid out in these chapters come to fruition in within a decade, started coming to fruition within a decade. Okay.
Can I add one thing?
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Before, I won't say everything I want to say.
Go ahead.
No,
This is
but-
Vivian's wheelhouse, so I would compose this PowerPoint with trepidation.
I brought a copy of the Declaration of Sentiments. It's interesting to read all the women's complaints, but this is not good, these separate spheres.
Yeah.
But in terms of, can we keep women's moral authority at home? There was, you're talking about the age of associations, there was the Female Moral Reform Society that women went out. Some women stood outside brothels and wrote down the name of men who went into those brothels and published them in the newspaper.
Yeah. Yeah.
So to sort of get their power, but
Yeah.
no, you're right. I mean, 10 years after this, you get the Declaration of Sentiment. It's just women's wanting to right the wrongs that they're facing.
Yeah, because
And
men,
divorce is one of them. They can't get divorced.
yeah. So it's the end of patriarchy in the traditional sense, but men still cover their wives legally, right? Women, at least in most states, may not legally hold property, right?
1845 was the first property rights for women.
Was that in Massachusetts or in New York?
New
Yeah.
York.
Well, there actually, you have a heritage. I mean, the constitutional reforms after the Revolution cost women power in New York because they've been covered by Dutch law rather than English law, where you were allowed to keep your legal self. You were allowed to inherit and pass along property. That went by the boards when English law took over after the Revolution. So yeah, those New Yorkers, they have a long tradition of women from New York. You got to watch. I know.
I really liked his comment about talking about women that were educated and lived in relatively wealthy homes, and their husbands decided to be homesteaders and packed up in the covered wagon and went out west and gave up everything and live in tents. And he said, I don't understand what those women were thinking. They were giving up a good life for a very unknown future. And he said they really were powerful, strong women and a lot of character, but interesting. You read a lot of books about those women that they gave up and their new life was not very comfortable.
Yeah, and that particular vignette, he goes into detail outside this book that happened in Pontiac, Michigan. So that was the wild frontier. Vivian, there's a question back there. Yeah, so you have a 35-year-old who looks 50. She's lost all her conversational and literary and musical circles. For him, it's a point of awe and admiration. This is a model of the American saint, of the female self-sacrifice. So however we take it, that's how he meant it. And I think his admiration and astonishment were real. Yeah.
When you just mentioned the fact when the English took over from the Dutch, it brought to my mind what I read an article called Juffrouw Maria van Rensselaer. For some reason, van Rensselaer men were dying off real early, like in their 40s and early 50s. So what kind of theoretically happened, Maria van Rensselaer inherited, pretty much took over all her Jeremiah's business, all this landed interest
Yeah.
in the colonial New York State.
Yeah.
I think she was her father was Stephen von Cortlandt,
Yeah.
who may have had some say, but in reality, she was the one running the whole show, taking care of the family and all the business.
Mhm.
And I found it very amusing. And you're telling me in Dutch law, she would have had a whole rights to all this land. the
Depends
English
on
would
what
not
she brought
allow
into it depends on what she brought into the marriage.
Well,
Property that she brought into the marriage would have remained in the colonial era, would have remained under her title,
Mhm.
and she had legal standing in court.
In the Dutch court, I would,
Well, in the colonial New York court.
uh-huh.
No, so when the revolution happens, and English common law is instituted, then this changes. That's how I understand it.
Okay.
But what you're describing also is a phenomenon, even without the legal change during the American Revolution, with these guys also. I mean, Abigail Adams is a classic case in point. She's writing, John, will you please get yourself back here? I have to run the farm, I have to run the family. I have all this correspondence you want me to keep up. So yeah, a lot of American women were running the family business during the revolution, and then the guys come home and and she writes to John at the Constitutional Convention, please remember the women, right? Okay, time for another question or two. Yeah, up here.
Considering he felt the influence of the church was very well-founded in America, he didn't seem to feel that it impacted men, like it didn't impact them morally or restrain them in their impulses.
Via their wives. The majority of churchgoers at that time, as at almost all times in American history, were women. The only exceptions to that apparently were the first generation in New England and Missouri Synod Lutherans in the first generation, where you had equal male to female participation. But otherwise, it kind of devolves to the natural 2-to-1 balance, two women in church for every guy. But it's what happened, even if by the late 19th century in major American cities, you have more men belong to the lodges than to churches. The Masons, but others as well. So yeah, church had become too feminine. You gather around with the Masons and do your own rituals, and this is manly stuff. These guys know business. They know the world, the hurly-burly of politics and so forth. So how can we find moral order in the male-dominated worlds? That's what the lodges, the secret societies are about. So yeah, sometimes they took the influence from their wives. Sometimes they had these kind of group bonding things and learned from their seniors, their age seniors, how to be a good businessman, but also a morally responsible citizen.
Yeah, the early revivals were to get men back into the church, right?
Yeah, and they were very popular with women. Yep.
Christian Reformed people belong to lodges
Not technically, nor Roman Catholics,
or Lutherans either.
nor Missouri Synod Lutherans anyway.
I was Wisconsin Synod. We couldn't either.
Yeah. And it was, I mean, whatever you think of that rule, it is an interesting thing that men and women should be under the same moral authority, not men under one and women under another. Also, these three churches you mentioned are all from the continent of Europe, where Freemasonry had a very different thing going on than in Britain. Masonic lodges in pre-revolutionary Europe were kind of underground revolutionary cells. And so they had a reputation of being against God and against law and order. So anyway.
Okay, I'm gonna not allow one more question because it'll take us well beyond our time. So save your questions for next week. It's 2:30 and We're done. Are you
Okay.
good with that?
I'm fine with that.
All
Yeah.
right.
Okay, see you next week.